So, continuing some reflections on this theme of abomination, and a word today that I must admit I don't come across very often, and don't particularly understand what it means, but it seems to be very closely related to the idea of abominable. Sometimes those of us whose sexual expression doesn't fit with what others think we should be doing. So particularly here thinking about cross-dressing and various forms that may take, or indeed cosplay. And that word is pitiful. So what does that actually mean? Well, one quite useful definition, I think, is from the Collins Dictionary, which describes pitifulness as someone or something that is pitiful, is so sad, weak or small that you feel pity for them. Synonyms here are things like distressing, pathetic, miserable, even harrowing. And it goes on to say, if you describe something as pitiful, you mean that it is completely inadequate. So there's this idea of disapproving. Clearly, that constitutes a pitifully inadequate return on my investment, might be something someone would say. And if you describe something as pitiful, you mean that it does not deserve respect or consideration. So when applied to people, it is a form of contempt, really. It's looking down. It's saying, what on earth are you doing? You are bringing shame upon yourself and perhaps bringing shame on your family or upon others. You really should not be doing this. So I think this is very much in the same area as people that would find let's say, dressing abominable. They got me thinking whether there are situations where I have a sense of feeling pity, or using this word in a fairly derogatory term, at least, either towards myself or indeed towards others. And actually, there was a hint of this the other day when I was putting together a list of videos to include in a new playlist of trans TV. And I came across a clip from RuPaul's Drag Race. I'll put the link to this particular video in the description, where the queens and some guests that they were making over were performing cheerleading roles and sort of deliberately prancing around, I think, sort of deliberately over the top kind of gestures with the twirling pom-poms and so on. And of course, this was intended to be entertaining. It wasn't intended that these guys were to be taken as really trying to impersonate accurately cheerleaders. But there was something a little bit disturbing even for me when I first saw this. I think I got over that. And I've had this sense a little bit with one or two things that I've tried as well. There are several obvious examples. One is cosplay, which I tried because I thought I was in a situation where I had this opportunity and it just seemed fun at the time to give it a go. This was a Japanese schoolgirl. I have myself attempted a cheerleader look. Not too much with the dancing, I have to say, and the prancing, but I guess there's that association with it. And also I tried a bunny girl, which again seemed a bit odd. And possibly even being a bride to some extent was one I was a little bit uncomfortable with. So those have aroused not such a strength of pitifulness in me about what I've done or seen in others, but I think a little bit of a hint of what others may feel, this particular view, this particular attitude. Now, at one level, of course, this is all just playful. But in the case, at least, of that cosplay character and maybe a cheerleader as well, it's often playing to someone who is much younger than we are, those who are enacting, and indeed maybe a child, albeit the adult is really not trying to pretend to be a child properly. But there's something I find a little bit uneasy about that. It's not normally where I go. It's not allowing me to express my feminine self as I am now. It's very much in the realms of something which is playful, experimental, um, fancy dress, whatever you want to describe it. But it's not really tapping into who I am, who Anya is, or who Claire is, unless I see, as I think I have done when I was playing those roles, that this is actually Anya playing out these fancy dress roles, perhaps Anya having some fun. And indeed, that seems to make it a bit more acceptable that I do see women will go to fancy dress balls, for example, as cheerleaders. And indeed, there will be cheerleaders in their 20s and 30s and beyond. It's not always associated with those in their teens. But I think the age thing may be a bit of a factor in the back of the mind here. So the RuPaul ensemble attempted a dance with their prancing around, their gestures, their pompons. In my view, it wasn't terribly well done, but probably wasn't meant to be terribly well done. It was meant to be, if not a lampoon, really nothing more than entertainment. Still, it was perhaps mocking younger women in general's moves, and perhaps the more ultra girly moves of that, or attempting that. And I think this again is something which seems a bit incongruous with the way perhaps many people believe men should be. They should have a fairly assertive, controlled gait that expresses their mature masculinity. Maybe that would be a part of this, if we're talking about stereotypes again. So once you've come through that rite of passage, you become an adult, you give up, as it were, the childish ways, and you give up the childish dressing up. That would be, again, perhaps what some of the critics, those who see this thing as pitiful, would consider here. And maybe it's just that there's something incongruous between ultra girly mannerisms and a manly gait. Although in my own case, I have to say, I'm not entirely sure whether my mannerisms, my gait is always totally manly. I don't think it is. It's not necessarily effeminate either. But yeah, I kind of feel there's a bit of a mix in me. And so if I'm acting sometimes in a way which is girly, that doesn't necessarily feel totally unnatural, even if it may appear that way to others. So it's a bit of a mystery, this whole question of what is pitiful. Pity, I can't pin down this pitiful thing, but doubtless I'll come back to this again at some point, and who knows, in the meantime, knowing me, I'll try out one or two things just for the hell of it that I possibly, and I'm sure others, might categorize as pitiful. I'm just going to have to live with that description sometimes, I think.